My daughter-in-law screamed at me in front of 30 family members that I had ruined her life and needed to stop being selfish with what was rightfully hers. I'm Richard Blackwood, and I've spent 42 years building something my son's wife never bothered to understand. She demanded I sign over my $5 million Hamptons estate on Christmas morning, posted about our family drama to her 200,000 TikTok followers, and gave me until New Year's to pack up and move to assisted living.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
What she didn't know was that the mansion she called her dream home was just one property in a portfolio she couldn't even imagine. By Christmas night, it was sold to her worst nightmare, and the life she thought she deserved was gone forever. I didn't argue with Jessica that morning. I didn't raise my voice when she called me a stubborn old man who was holding back the family's future. I just quietly excused myself from the breakfast table, walked to my study, and made 4 phone calls that would change everything. If you're watching this, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because this story starts 4 decades ago when I made a promise to myself about the difference between earning respect and demanding it. That promise would cost my daughter-in-law more than she ever imagined possible. Most people look at me and see exactly what Jessica sees. A 68-year-old widower who drives a 12-year-old Honda Civic with rust spots and a dented bumper. Someone who shops at Costco in bulk, wears the same 3 cardigans my late wife Margaret bought me years ago, and brings grocery store wine to dinner parties where everyone else arrives with bottles that cost more than my monthly utilities. Jessica Blackwood, 31 years old, 200,000 TikTok followers, lifestyle influencer, and absolutely convinced that her father-in-law is a burden on the family's social standing. "Richard, you literally dress like someone's grandfather," she told me last Thanksgiving when I showed up wearing my favorite brown cardigan. "Michael's colleagues are going to think we come from nothing when they see you." Michael Blackwood, my only son, Harvard MBA, works at Goldman Sachs, drives a $150,000 Tesla, and somehow convinced himself that his wife's embarrassment about his father was justified. The first sign I was losing my son happened 8 months ago. Jessica started referring to my Hamptons estate as the family property during their visits, then Michael's future inheritance, then simply our house. "When Michael and I have kids, we'll obviously need the estate," she announced over Christmas dinner last year. "You could move into one of those nice senior communities. They have activities and everything." Activities. As if I was some lonely old man who needed organized entertainment instead of a business owner who chose his lifestyle deliberately. The second sign came when she started her TikTok series called Rich Family Problems. Without asking my permission, she filmed content inside my home, talking about dealing with stubborn older family members who don't understand modern real estate markets. The comments were predictably harsh, her followers calling me a typical boomer dad who was selfishly hoarding wealth from the younger generation. One person wrote, "Girl, just wait for nature to take its course. Old people can't live forever." Jessica screenshotted the worst comments and showed them to Michael during one of their visits. "See, even strangers understand that it's time for Dad to step aside." Michael never defended me. He just nodded and suggested we have a family conversation about the future. What neither Jessica nor Michael knew was that I'd been watching her TikTok content for months, watching her show off the designer handbags that Michael bought with his Goldman Sachs salary, the $85,000 Porsche Cayenne lease that came out of Michael's account every month, the European vacation she documented with hashtags like blessed and family wealth. In her online world, she'd married into old money. I was just the inconvenient grandfather figure who happened to be sitting on prime real estate. "Michael's dad is kind of a simple guy," I heard her tell her friend during a FaceTime call she took while staying in my guest room. "Blue-collar background, he worked in construction or something before he retired. Sweet man, but he doesn't really understand how real estate works in the Hamptons market." Construction. As if building a business empire was the same as swinging a hammer for 40 years. But the breaking point wasn't the dismissal or the social media humiliation or even the entitled attitude toward my property. The breaking point was what happened 3 weeks before Christmas when Jessica brought her parents to my house for what she called a family strategy meeting. They walked through my home like they were conducting an appraisal. Jessica's mother commenting on how the furniture was very traditional and how the kitchen could use a complete modernization. Jessica's father, a mid-level insurance executive, started talking about property tax implications and the wisdom of transitioning assets to the next generation while the older generation can still enjoy seeing the benefits. "Richard," Jessica said as we sat in my living room overlooking the ocean, "my parents and I have been discussing your situation. We think it's time to consider some changes." My situation? As if living in my own home was a problem that needed solving. "What kind of changes, Jessica?" Her mother jumped in with a folder of printed materials. "We've researched some lovely senior living communities, active adult communities with golf courses and social programs, much more appropriate for someone your age." Much more appropriate. The same phrase my former daughter had used years ago in that other story I'd heard about. "And what happens to this house?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Well, Michael and I would take over the property management," Jessica said, as if she was doing me a favor. "We understand real estate markets better than you do, and frankly, you're probably struggling with the maintenance costs on a property this size." Struggling with maintenance costs on a house I'd owned outright for 15 years. Property taxes of $78,000 annually that I paid without blinking. Utilities, landscaping, insurance, repairs, and upkeep that totaled nearly $25,000 monthly. Jessica had no idea how I afforded any of it, but she was certain I couldn't continue. "What if I said no?" I asked quietly. Jessica laughed. Actually laughed. "Richard, be realistic. You can't maintain a $5 million estate on Social Security and whatever pension you have from construction work. The carrying costs alone are probably killing you." Social Security and a construction pension. That's what she thought was funding my lifestyle. "Michael agrees with us," Jessica continued. "This transition makes sense for everyone. You get to enjoy your golden years without financial stress, and we get to preserve the family asset for future generations." Michael, who was sitting silently beside his wife, finally spoke up. "Dad, we're trying to help you. This house is too much for you to handle alone." Too much for me to handle. A house I'd bought with cash after Margaret died, choosing the Hamptons specifically because she'd always dreamed of living near the ocean. "I'll need to think about it," I said. Jessica's expression hardened. "There's not much to think about, Richard. We've already spoken with a realtor friend who specializes in senior transitions. She can help you find something more suitable for your budget." My budget, as if she had any idea what my budget actually was. "How long do I have to think about it?" Jessica pulled out her phone and opened her calendar app. "We'd like to have this resolved before the new year. That gives you about 3 weeks to start packing and touring facilities." 3 weeks to pack up my life and move to assisted living so my daughter-in-law could claim my house. "And if I refuse?" Her father spoke up for the first time. "Richard, let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be. Property law is complex, but family transfers can be handled smoothly if everyone cooperates." Family transfers. Legal threats wrapped in polite language. "We've consulted with our attorney," Jessica added. "Since Margaret passed and you don't have a will specifically protecting the property, Michael has legitimate inheritance claims. We're trying to do this the nice way." The nice way. By threatening legal action if I didn't voluntarily surrender my home. I nodded calmly. "I understand. Let me review my options." Jessica smiled like she'd just won something. "Great. I'll have our realtor call you next week to discuss the transition timeline." After they left, I sat in my study looking out at the ocean through windows I'd watched countless sunrises through since Margaret's death. My daughter-in-law genuinely believed she was rescuing me from financial ruin while securing her own future. She had no idea that the house she coveted was just one small piece of something much larger. The next morning, I opened the filing cabinet I hadn't touched in months. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The one Jessica had walked past dozens of times without asking what was inside. The documents were exactly where I've left them. Blackwood Development Corporation, incorporation papers, commercial property acquisition, bank statements showing liquid assets that would make her TikTok followers' heads spin. I spread everything across my desk and took pictures with my phone. Then I made a list of the calls I needed to make. Christmas was still 3 weeks away, but Jessica had just started a countdown she didn't understand. By the time she finished her holiday shopping, the life she thought she deserved would be nothing but a memory. The Forbes article from 3 years ago was buried on page 47 under America's Quiet Real Estate Kings. They'd called me the invisible developer, the man who built half of Long Island's luxury shopping centers without anyone knowing his name. Jessica had never bothered to Google me. Neither had Michael, apparently. They saw the Honda Civic in my driveway and assumed they knew my entire life story. What they didn't see were the 18 commercial properties generating $2.3 million in monthly rental income, or the development company that had transformed abandoned warehouses into premium retail spaces for the past 4 decades. Blackwood Development Corporation started in 1982 when I was 26 years old and Margaret was pregnant with Michael. I bought a condemned factory building in Queens for $85,000 with every penny we had saved, plus a loan that terrified my wife. She thought I'd lost my mind. The building had no roof, water damage throughout, and structural issues that would cost more to fix than the property was worth. But I saw something Margaret couldn't see yet: location. The factory sat on 2 acres in an area that would become the heart of Queens' commercial district within a decade. I spent 8 months working 18-hour days doing most of the renovation work myself: electrical, plumbing, roofing, flooring. Margaret would bring me dinner at the construction site, Michael sleeping in his carrier while she helped me paint walls late into the night. When we finally opened the renovated space as Queens Commerce Center, we had 12 retail units and a waiting list of businesses wanting to lease. The monthly rental income was $47,000. We'd invested $340,000 total and created an asset worth $1.8 million. That first success taught me everything I needed to know about real estate development. Buy distressed properties in emerging areas, do the work yourself when possible, create value, don't just speculate on appreciation. Over the next 40 years, I followed that formula through recessions, market crashes, and economic booms. When other developers were leveraging themselves into bankruptcy, I was paying cash for properties everyone else thought were worthless. When shopping centers were failing in the early 2000s, I was buying them for 30 cents on the dollar and converting them into mixed-use developments. Michael grew up watching me leave for construction sites at dawn and return after dark covered in paint and sawdust. He saw the Honda Civic, the Costco shopping trips, the careful budgeting that allowed us to reinvest every available dollar into the next project. What he didn't understand was that living modestly wasn't about being poor. It was about building wealth instead of displaying it. Margaret and I drove used cars so we could buy commercial properties. We shopped at discount stores so we could invest in prime real estate. We lived in a modest suburban house so we could accumulate the capital that would eventually buy us financial freedom. When Margaret was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in 2018, I had enough liquid assets to get her the best medical care available anywhere in the world: private specialists, experimental treatments, a full-time nursing staff at home. We spent $800,000 over 2 years fighting her cancer. When she passed away, I bought the Hamptons estate with cash because she'd always dreamed of living near the ocean, and I wanted to honor her memory by finally enjoying some of what we'd built together. The house cost $4.2 million. Jessica assumed I'd inherited it or somehow gotten lucky with a property investment. The idea that I'd paid cash for a luxury estate was impossible in her worldview because it didn't match her assumptions about construction workers and their retirement savings. When Michael brought her home the first time 3 years ago, she walked through my house taking Instagram photos and talking about how blessed Michael was to have grown up with family money. Family money! As if wealth had magically appeared instead of being built through 4 decades of careful work. Jessica's social media presence exploded after she married Michael. She went from 12,000 followers to over 200,000 by positioning herself as someone who'd married into old money. Her content focused on luxury lifestyle tips, expensive fashion hauls, and what she called generational wealth management. She posted videos from my house talking about family estates and inherited properties, without ever mentioning that I was very much alive and had built everything she was showing off. Her most popular TikTok series was called Old Money Aesthetic, where she gave advice on how to look wealthy without spending money. The irony was incredible. She was teaching people how to appear rich while secretly resenting the man who actually was rich because he didn't look the part. Her followers ate it up. Comments like, "Your family has such good taste," and "I love how your husband's family keeps it classy and understated." She'd screenshot the best comments and text them to Michael. "See, people understand what real wealth looks like." Real wealth, according to Jessica, meant designer clothes, expensive cars, and ostentatious displays of luxury. The fact that I could buy and sell most of her followers' dream houses without checking my bank balance was irrelevant because I didn't perform wealth the way she expected. During family dinners, she'd make comments about my simple lifestyle choices and how refreshing it was that I didn't feel the need to show off. She thought she was complimenting me. I was actually being patronized by someone who had never earned $1 of independent income in her adult life. The tension reached a boiling point last summer when Jessica decided to throw what she called a family wealth celebration at my house. She invited 40 people, hired professional caterers, and turned my home into the backdrop for a massive social media production. She never asked my permission. She just announced that she was hosting a party to celebrate the Blackwood family legacy and expected me to be grateful for the opportunity to meet her friends. The party was a disaster from my perspective, but a social media goldmine from hers. Jessica's friends spent the evening taking photos in every room of my house, posting Instagram stories about old money vibes and family estate goals. Meanwhile, Jessica gave tours like she owned the place, explaining the history of furniture pieces and artwork that I'd actually bought from estate sales and antiques shops. She invented stories about family heirlooms and generational collections that existed only in her imagination. One guest, a lifestyle blogger with 300,000 followers, posted a video tour of my library calling it the most authentic old money space I've ever seen. She praised the curated collection of first editions and the lived-in luxury that only comes from generations of refined taste. My books were mostly construction manuals, business biographies, and mystery novels I'd collected over 40 years. There wasn't a first edition in the room. But Jessica played along, nodding seriously and talking about how Grandfather Blackwood was quite the collector. I wasn't Grandfather Blackwood. I was Michael's father, and I'd bought those books at used bookstores because I enjoyed reading. But in Jessica's narrative, everything in my house had to have a prestigious backstory that matched her social media brand. She couldn't admit that her father-in-law was a self-made developer who read Tom Clancy novels and owned construction equipment manuals. That reality didn't fit her old money aesthetic content strategy. The morning after the party, Jessica posted a highlight reel that got 400,000 views in 12 hours. The caption read, "Grateful for family legacy and the wisdom of older generations who understood how to build lasting wealth." The comments were filled with praise for her family's taste and questions about how to achieve similar style. Jessica responded to dozens of comments, giving advice about timeless investment pieces and understanding quality over quantity. She was teaching wealth-building strategies based on my house without having an idea how I actually built my wealth. That's when I realized Jessica wasn't just entitled or materialistic. She was actively profiting from a false narrative about my life and work. Her entire social media presence was built on the assumption that I represented old money tradition when I actually represented exactly the opposite. New money, self-made wealth, and the kind of work ethic that builds empires one project at a time. She was selling a lie to her followers, and the lie was my life story, rewritten to serve her personal brand. Michael never corrected her. During family conversations, he'd let Jessica talk about family property and generational assets without mentioning that everything she was describing had been built by his father's hands and business acumen. He seemed to prefer her version of our family story. In Jessica's narrative, the Blackwoods were sophisticated inheritors of wealth. In reality, we were the family of a man who'd spent 40 years turning abandoned buildings into shopping centers and had the bank statements to prove it.
The final straw came 2 days before Thanksgiving, when Jessica called me directly instead of going through Michael. Her voice had the sharp edge I'd learned to recognize when she wanted something important. "Richard, we need to have a serious conversation about your living situation. Michael and I have been discussing this with my parents, and we think it's time for some major changes." Changes, not requests or suggestions, but changes that had already been decided without my input. "What kind of changes, Jessica?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew where this was heading. "We think you should consider moving into a senior living community after the new year. Something with activities and medical support nearby. You're getting older, and this house is becoming too much for you to maintain properly." Too much for me to maintain? The house I'd been maintaining perfectly for 5 years without any help from anyone. "Jessica, I'm 68, not 98. I'm in excellent health, and I enjoy living here." She sighed, like I was being deliberately difficult. "Richard, be realistic. You're alone in a massive house that's way too expensive for someone on a fixed income. The heating bills alone must be killing you in the winter. And what happens if you have a medical emergency? There's no one around to help you." Fixed income. She'd constructed an entire narrative about my financial situation based on absolutely nothing. "What makes you think I'm struggling financially?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "Well, I mean, you're retired, you drive that old Honda, you shop at Costco. It's pretty obvious you're trying to stretch your retirement savings as far as possible." Pretty obvious to someone who had never asked a single question about my actual financial situation. "Jessica, what if I told you I'm not struggling financially?" She laughed, actually laughed. "Richard, come on. You worked in construction your whole life. Even with a decent pension and Social Security, you can't possibly afford to maintain a $5 million estate. The property taxes alone are probably more than your entire annual income." More than my entire annual income? Last year's property taxes were $78,000. My quarterly dividend payments from Blackwood Development Corporation were $340,000. But Jessica had convinced herself she understood my finances better than I did. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. "We found some really nice communities in upstate New York, much more affordable, and they have golf courses and social activities. You'd probably make friends your own age upstate instead of rattling around in this big empty house." Rattling around in my big empty house. The house where I hosted weekly poker games with 5 other retired business owners. The house where I volunteered to mentor young entrepreneurs through SCORE every Thursday. The house where I was writing a book about commercial real estate development that would be published next spring. Apparently, none of that counted as a meaningful life to Jessica. "And what happens to this house while I'm making friends my own age upstate?" The question I'd been waiting to ask. "Well, obviously Michael and I would need to take over the property management. We can't let a $5 million asset sit empty and deteriorate. We'd probably spend part of the year here and rent it out during peak season to help cover the maintenance costs." Help cover the maintenance costs with rental income from my house? Jessica, have you and Michael discussed this plan with each other? Of course we have. Michael agrees that this transition makes sense for everyone. You get to enjoy retirement without financial stress, and we get to preserve the family asset for our future children. Family asset. My house had become a family asset in her mind. Property I'd bought with my own money after my wife died had somehow transformed into Michael's inheritance that Jessica was now managing. What if I'm not ready to move? Her tone shifted from persuasive to impatient. Richard, you don't really have a choice here. The finances don't work. You can't afford this house long term, and it's irresponsible to let it become a burden on Michael and me. A burden on Michael and me. The two people who had contributed exactly $0 toward purchasing, maintaining, or improving my property. Jessica, I need to think about this. There's really nothing to think about. My parents have already researched the best communities, and Michael's already spoken with a real estate attorney about the property transfer process. We're trying to make this as smooth as possible for you. Michael had spoken with a real estate attorney. My son was consulting lawyers about transferring my property without bothering to discuss it with me first. How long do I have to make this decision? We'd like to have everything finalized before Christmas. That gives you about 3 weeks to start packing and touring facilities. I've already scheduled appointments for you at 2 communities next week. She'd scheduled appointments for me, as if I was an aging parent who needed my children to make medical appointments because I could no longer handle adult responsibilities. Jessica, what happens if I refuse to move? The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then her voice came back harder than before. Richard, let's not make this more complicated than it needs to be. Michael is your only child and your legal heir. If something happened to you tomorrow, this house would go to him anyway. We're just trying to manage the transition while you're still alive to see him benefit from it. Legal heir. She was threatening me with my own mortality to justify taking my house. And if I'm not comfortable with that timeline, then we'd have to explore other options. My father knows property law, and Michael's attorney friend says there are ways to handle situations where elderly parents aren't making sound financial decisions. Nobody wants it to come to that, but we have to think about Michael's future. Elderly parents who aren't making sound financial decisions, legal intervention, competency challenges. Jessica was threatening to have me declared mentally incompetent if I didn't voluntarily surrender my house. I see. Thank you for explaining the situation so clearly, Jessica. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. I know change is hard, but this really is what's best for everyone. What's best for everyone. After I hung up, I sat in my study looking at 40 years' worth of business documents and realized my daughter-in-law had just threatened me with legal action based on assumptions about my finances that were so wildly inaccurate they bordered on comedy. She thought I was a retired construction worker living on Social Security who couldn't afford property taxes. The reality was that I owned 18 commercial properties, generating passive income in a month than she and Michael earned in a year combined. But Jessica's threat crystallized something I'd been avoiding. This wasn't about my house. This was about respect. She didn't see me as a successful business owner who deserved to make his own decisions about his property. She saw me as an obstacle preventing her from claiming what she believed was rightfully hers. The house wasn't just my home to Jessica. It was her future, her social media backdrop, her ticket to the lifestyle she felt entitled to. I opened my laptop and started researching Jessica's TikTok analytics. 200,000 followers, average engagement rate of 4.3%, sponsored content rates between $8,000 and $15,000 per post. Her social media income was probably around $200,000 annually, all of it dependent on maintaining her old money aesthetic brand.
The brand that was built entirely on content filmed in my house, using my furniture, and promoting a lifestyle funded by my commercial real estate empire. Jessica had turned my home into a business asset for her influencer career, and now she wanted to make that arrangement permanent by forcing me out and taking legal ownership. She wasn't just trying to steal my house, she was trying to steal the foundation of her entire career. Without access to my estate, her generational wealth content would be exposed as fiction. Her followers would realize she wasn't actually from old money. Her brand would collapse. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called Michael directly. "Dad, hey, Jessica said you two had a good conversation about the living situation." A good conversation. "Michael, did you know your wife threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent if I don't sign over my house?" Silence. "Then, Dad, that's not what she meant. She's just worried about you living alone in such a big place." "Son, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Do you believe I'm mentally incompetent?" "Of course not, Dad. But you have to admit, maintaining that house is a lot of work for someone your age." "Someone your age." "Michael, what do you think I did for a living?" Another silence. "You worked in construction. You told me about the projects you worked on when I was growing up." "I didn't work in construction, Michael. I owned a construction and development company. There's a significant difference." "Dad, what are you talking about?" "My own son didn't know what I did for a living." Jessica's assumptions about my career weren't just her mistake. They were our family's shared delusion. "Michael, have you ever asked me how I afford the house in the Hamptons? I assumed Mom left you some money, or maybe you invested well?" "Maybe I invest."
The next morning, I opened the filing cabinet that Jessica had walked past hundreds of times without ever asking what was inside. 3 drawers full of documents that would shatter every assumption she'd made about my financial situation. Property deeds, corporate filings, bank statements, investment portfolios, and business contracts spanning 4 decades. The evidence of a career she didn't know existed and wealth she couldn't imagine. I pulled out the Blackwood Development Corporation annual report from last year. Gross revenue, $14.7 million. Net profit, $8.2 million. Current assets under management, $127 million. 18 commercial properties across Long Island and Queens, generating an average monthly rental income of $2.3 million. The construction worker Jessica pitied was actually running a commercial real estate empire that employed 43 people and had weathered every economic downturn since 1982. The first call I made was to Catherine Mills, my attorney for the past 20 years. She'd handled every property acquisition, every lease negotiation, and every legal challenge Blackwood Development had faced. Catherine answered on the second ring. "Richard, how are you? I wasn't expecting to hear from you until our January strategy meeting." "And Catherine, I need you to prepare some documents, and I need them before Christmas." "What kind of documents?" "The kind that teach my daughter-in-law the difference between inheritance law and wishful thinking." Catherine was quiet for a moment. She dealt with enough family wealth disputes to recognize the tone in my voice. "Richard, what's happened?" I explained Jessica's ultimatum, Michael's involvement with real estate attorneys, and the threats about having me declared mentally incompetent. "They want me in assisted living by New Year's so they can take over the Hamptons property. Jessica seems to believe I'm a retired construction worker living on Social Security who can't afford property taxes." Catherine's laugh was sharp. "She has no idea about Blackwood Development?" "None. Neither does Michael, apparently. They think I got lucky with some investments." "Richard, do you want me to educate them gently, or do you want to make a point?" I looked at the Forbes article calling me one of America's invisible real estate kings. "Catherine, I want you to make sure every legal threat Jessica has made backfires spectacularly. If she wants to play property law games, let's show her what actual property law looks like." "How public do you want this to get?" "She's been using my house as content for 200,000 TikTok followers. I'd say she made it public first." The second call was to David Shen, Blackwood Development's chief financial officer. David had been managing our books since 2008 and knew every asset in our portfolio down to the penny. David, I need you to prepare a complete financial disclosure package. Every property, every bank account, every investment, every stream of income. Full documentation. That's going to be a substantial package, Richard. Are we going public? Something like that. I also need you to expedite the Harrison Plaza deal. Harrison Plaza was our latest acquisition, a failing shopping center in Nassau County that we'd bought for $8.5 million 6 months ago. The renovation was ahead of schedule, and we'd already received offers from 3 different buyers wanting to purchase the completed project. You want me to close the Harrison deal before Christmas? I want you to close it before Saturday. Full asking price, cash only, no contingencies. Richard, that's aggressive timing, but doable. The Meridian Group has been pushing for a quick close. They'll pay the full $24 million if we can transfer this week. $24 million for a property we'd bought for $8.5 million. A $15.5 million profit in 6 months. Make it happen, David. And prepare a press release about the sale. Make sure it mentions Blackwood Development's track record and current portfolio value. The third call was to James Morrison, my business partner and the closest thing I had to a brother. James had been with Blackwood Development since 1987, and he'd watched Michael grow up thinking his father was just another blue-collar guy who worked with his hands. Jimmy, I need a favor. A big one. Name it Richard. I need you to document everything. Every property we own, every deal we've closed, every employee we've hired, every community project we've funded. I want a complete record of what we've built. You writing your memoirs? Something like that. My daughter-in-law is trying to have me declared incompetent so she can steal my house. Apparently she thinks I'm too poor and confused to manage my own affairs. James was quiet for a long moment. Richard, you realize you could buy her entire neighborhood with what you make in quarterly dividends. She doesn't. That's the problem. How much does she not know? She thinks I'm a retired construction worker, living on Social Security and a pension. She has no idea Blackwood Development exists. Whistle. That's going to be one hell of a wake-up call. What do you need from me? I need you to be ready to explain to her exactly what Blackwood Development is and what it's worth in front of witnesses at Christmas dinner. The fourth call was to Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, the family therapist Michael and I had seen briefly after Margaret died. Dr. Rodriguez specialized in family wealth dynamics and helped dozens of families navigate conflicts around money and inheritance. Dr. Rodriguez, it's Richard Blackwood. I need to schedule an emergency session, and I need you to document everything we discuss. Richard, what's happening? I explained the situation, from Jessica's social media presence to her legal threats to Michael's apparent ignorance about my actual career. They both seem to believe I'm financially struggling and mentally declining. I need professional documentation that I'm competent to make my own decisions about my property. Richard, this sounds like a case of assumed incompetence based on age and lifestyle choices. Very common in wealthy families where the patriarch doesn't display wealth conventionally. Can you prepare a competency evaluation that would hold up in court? Absolutely. We'll do cognitive testing, financial capacity assessment, and decision-making evaluation. When do you need it? Before Saturday. Jessica has given me a 3-week deadline, and I intend to meet it. I can clear my schedule for Thursday morning. Richard, are you sure you want to handle this confrontationally? Dr. Rodriguez, my daughter-in-law threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent if I don't sign over my house. I'd say she made it confrontational first. By Wednesday evening, everything was in motion. Catherine had prepared guardianship protection documents, power of attorney clarifications, and a comprehensive legal analysis of Jessica's threats that would demolish any competency challenge. David had closed the Harrison Plaza sale for $24 million and prepared a financial disclosure that would make Jessica's head spin. James had compiled 40 years of Blackwood Development history into a presentation that would shatter Michael's assumptions about his father's career. Dr. Rodriguez had completed my competency evaluation with results that would embarrass anyone who suggested I was mentally declining. Cognitive function, superior. Financial capacity, expert level. Decision-making ability, excellent. The evaluation concluded that I demonstrate exceptional business acumen and financial literacy, consistent with decades of successful commercial real estate development. Thursday afternoon, I received a text from Jessica. Richard, I've scheduled your tour at Sunset Manor Senior Living for Saturday at 2 p.m. They have a lovely 2-bedroom unit available. Please don't be difficult about this. A lovely 2-bedroom unit where I could live while she claimed my $5 million estate. I texted back,
Jessica, I've made other arrangements for Saturday. See you at Christmas dinner. Friday evening, Michael called. Dad, Jessica said you're being stubborn about the senior living tour. She's trying to help you. Michael, how much do you think this house is worth? She researched it, about $5 million, right? And how much do you think it costs me to maintain it annually? I don't know, maybe $100,000? Michael, bring Jessica to Christmas dinner. Make sure she comes hungry. Dad, what are you planning? I'm planning to give your wife exactly what she asked for, complete transparency about the family finances. Saturday morning, the Harrison Plaza sale was announced in 3 real estate trade publications. Blackwood Development Corporation closes $24 million Nassau County deal, marking latest success in 40-year commercial real estate empire. The article mentioned our portfolio value, our track record of successful developments, and my reputation as one of Long Island's most successful but publicity-shy developers. I printed copies of every article and added them to the stack of documents that would transform Christmas dinner into an education Jessica would never forget. She had demanded transparency about my financial situation. She had threatened legal action if I didn't cooperate with her timeline. She had made it clear that she considered my resistance to her demands evidence of mental incompetence. Sunday morning, I woke up before dawn and made coffee in the kitchen of the house Jessica thought she deserved. In 12 hours, my family would gather for Christmas dinner, and my daughter-in-law would learn the difference between assumptions and reality. She had spent 3 years building a social media career on the foundation of my success, while plotting to steal the house that made her content possible. By Christmas night, Jessica's world would be completely different. But first, she'd have to sit through dinner and discover that the old man she had been trying to force into assisted living was actually the most successful person at the table. And unlike her social media empire built on borrowed luxury, everything I'd built was real. Christmas dinner started exactly the way Jessica expected. 30 family members gathered around my dining room table, the same room she'd been using as a backdrop for her old money aesthetic TikTok content for 3 years. She arrived wearing a $2,800 designer dress, carrying the $4,500 Hermès bag Michael had bought her for their anniversary, looking every inch the wealthy heiress she pretended to be online. Michael wore his nervous smile, the one he'd perfected whenever he suspected family drama was brewing. Jessica immediately started working the room, greeting relatives with air kisses and compliments about their outfits. She moved like a hostess in her own home, which in her mind she practically was. My sister Eleanor, Michael's favorite aunt, pulled me aside during cocktail hour. Richard, Jessica seems lovely, but there's something about the way she talks about this house that makes me uncomfortable. Eleanor had known me for 68 years. She'd watched me build Blackwood development from nothing. What do you mean, Eleanor? She keeps referring to our family traditions and generational property management, almost like she's already planning your funeral. Eleanor wasn't wrong. Jessica had been testing her hostess routine all evening, directing conversations, making seating arrangements, and generally behaving like the lady of the manor. She'd even instructed my housekeeper about serving preferences without asking me first. During the appetizer course, Jessica's father, Harold, raised his wine glass. I'd like to propose a toast to family transitions and new beginnings. Sometimes the older generation needs guidance from the younger generation to make wise decisions about the future. The room went quiet. Harold was making a speech about my supposed mental decline at my own Christmas dinner. Jessica smiled and nodded approvingly. Actually, Harold, I said, standing up with my own glass, I'd like to propose a different toast, to assumptions, and what happens when we make them without gathering all the facts. Jessica's file flickered. She sensed something was wrong, but couldn't identify what. Dad, maybe we should save the speeches for after dinner, Michael suggested nervously. He knew his father well enough to recognize when I was setting up for something dramatic. Michael, I think Christmas dinner is the perfect time for family transparency, especially since Jessica has been so concerned about my ability to make sound financial decisions. The room's attention shifted to me. 30 people suddenly realized they were about to witness something more interesting than typical holiday small talk. Jessica's face tightened. This wasn't part of her plan. "Richard," Harold interrupted, "we all appreciate your independence, but sometimes wisdom means knowing when to accept help from people who understand complex financial matters." Complex financial matters. A man who sold insurance policies was lecturing me about complex financial matters. "Harold, what makes you think I don't understand financial matters?" "Well, I mean, you worked in construction, very respectable work, but not exactly preparation for managing multi-million-dollar assets." Multi-million-dollar assets. "Harold, you're absolutely right. Managing multi-million-dollar assets requires specific expertise. Jessica, would you mind helping me with something?" She looked suspicious but nodded. "Could you bring me that folder from my study, the one marked Christmas Disclosure?" She hesitated. She had never been invited into my study during her visits, the room she'd walked past hundreds of times without asking what was inside. She returned with a thick manila folder, clearly puzzled about what kind of disclosure her father-in-law might need to make about his modest finances. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. "This is the annual report for Blackwood Development Corporation. Our gross revenue last year was $14.7 million. The room went silent. Jessica stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. "I'm sorry, what?" "Blackwood Development Corporation, the company I founded 42 years ago. We specialize in commercial real estate acquisition, renovation, and management." I pulled out another document. "These are the property deeds for our current portfolio. 18 commercial properties across Long Island and Queens. Current portfolio value approximately $127 million. Jessica's face went white. Michael looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Harold's mouth was hanging open. "Richard," Eleanor said quietly, "are you saying you own $127 million worth of commercial real estate?" "Eleanor, I'm saying Blackwood Development owns it. I'm the sole owner of Blackwood Development, so yes, technically I own it." Jessica found her voice. "That's impossible. You drive a Honda Civic. You shop at Costco. You dress like," she gestured at my cardigan, "like someone's grandfather." "I am someone's grandfather, Jessica. I'm also one of the most successful commercial real estate developers on Long Island. The two things aren't mutually exclusive." I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app for Blackwood Development's operating account. This is our current liquid assets balance, $23.7 million. I held the phone up so Jessica could see the screen. She leaned forward, squinting at the numbers like they might change if she looked hard enough. "That says $23 million? "It does." "Richard," Harold said carefully, "if this is true, why do you live so modestly?" "Because I built wealth by spending less than I earned and reinvesting profits into appreciating assets. The Honda Civic gets me where I need to go. The Costco membership saves money I can invest in my next property acquisition. The cardigan keeps me warm without requiring a fashion budget that could be used for business development." Jessica was scrolling through her phone frantically. "You're not listed anywhere. I've never seen Blackwood Development mentioned in any real estate publications." I pulled out another folder. Forbes magazine, September 2021. America's Invisible Real Estate Kings, page 47. Jessica grabbed the magazine and flipped to the article. There was my photo, standing in front of the Queens Commerce Center, the first property I'd ever developed. "The article calls you Long Island's most successful stealth developer." She read out loud, her voice getting smaller with each word. "It says you've built a commercial real estate empire while maintaining complete anonymity and a deliberately modest lifestyle." The room was completely silent now.
30 people watching Jessica realize that everything she'd assumed about her father-in-law was wrong. Jessica, I continued, you've spent 3 years using this house as content for your social media career. You've built your entire online brand around the idea that you married into old money. You've taught your followers about generational wealth management, while planning to force the man who actually built the wealth into assisted living so you could steal his house. Her hands were shaking now. I pulled out my phone again. This is yesterday's Harrison Plaza sale announcement. Blackwood Development just sold a renovated shopping center for $24 million. We bought it 6 months ago for $8.5 million. That's a $15.5 million profit in half a year. Michael spoke for the first time since the disclosure began. Dad, why didn't you ever tell me about any of this? Michael, when's the last time you asked me about my work, about my day, about anything beyond whether I was planning to die soon enough for you to inherit this house? He couldn't answer because we both knew the truth. He'd been as uninterested in my actual life as Jessica was. But Dad, I thought you were retired. I am retired from hands-on construction work. I'm not retired from running the company I built. Jessica was reading the Forbes article with tears in her eyes. It says here you employ 43 people and have never laid anyone off, even during economic downturns. It says you've anonymously funded college scholarships for your employees' children. 237 scholarships over 20 years. $1.6 million total investment in education. Harold cleared his throat. Richard, if you have this kind of wealth, why didn't you correct our assumptions? Because, Harold, you never asked about my actual financial situation before threatening to have me declared mentally incompetent. You researched senior living facilities and consulted attorneys about property transfers without bothering to verify whether your assumptions about my competency were accurate. I pulled out the final document. This is my competency evaluation from Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, completed 3 days ago. Cognitive function, superior. Financial capacity, expert level. Decision-making ability, excellent. The evaluation concludes that I demonstrate exceptional business acumen and financial literacy. Jessica was crying openly now. Jessica, I said gently, you threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent if I didn't sign over my house. You gave me a 3-week deadline to pack my...
The dinner ended in chaos. Jessica locked herself in the guest bathroom, sobbing while frantically scrolling through her phone. Michael sat at the dining table staring at the Forbes article like it might explain how he'd lived 31 years without knowing his father was worth over $100 million. Harold and his wife left without saying goodbye, muttering about family embarrassment and poor communication. By 9 p.m., my house was empty, except for Michael, Jessica, and the sound of her crying through the bathroom door. Jessica, I called through the door, we need to finish our conversation. Go away, she screamed. You've humiliated me enough for one day. Humiliated, as if revealing the truth about my own financial situation was somehow an attack on her. Jessica, you gave me a 3-week deadline. We're going to meet it. The door opened and she emerged with mascara streaked down her face, holding her phone like a weapon. Richard, you deliberately deceived me. You let me think you were poor while you're sitting on a fortune. I never told you I was poor. You assumed I was poor because I drive a Honda and shop at Costco. Did you ever ask me about my finances? She couldn't answer because we both knew she'd never asked. You've been making TikTok content in my house for 3 years, telling your followers about generational wealth and family estates without once asking how I could afford the lifestyle you were showcasing. Jessica's phone was buzzing constantly. She glanced at it, and her face went even paler. What's wrong? Michael asked. My notifications are going crazy. Someone recorded part of dinner and posted it on Instagram. She showed us her phone. A relative had filmed the moment when I revealed the $127 million portfolio value and posted it with the caption, "When you assume your father-in-law is broke, but he's actually richer than everyone at the table combined." The video had been viewed 50,000 times in 2 hours. The comments were brutal. "This is what happens when you judge people by their appearance. She really thought she could steal his house." The audacity of trying to put your own father-in-law in assisted living. This is why you don't mess with real rich people. Jessica was reading the comments aloud, her voice getting higher with each one. "They're calling me a gold digger. They're saying I married Michael for money that doesn't even exist." She scrolled frantically through her TikTok notifications. "I'm losing followers. I've lost 15,000 in the past 2 hours." Her carefully constructed social media empire was crumbling in real time. The old money aesthetic content that had made her internet famous was being exposed as fiction. "Jessica," I said calmly, "your followers are learning the same thing you just learned, the difference between assumptions and reality." She turned on me with fury that surprised even Michael. "You could have told me. You could have corrected my assumptions instead of letting me make a fool of myself." "When, Jessica? During the 3 years you spent filming content in my house without asking permission? Or maybe during the weeks you spent planning to have me declared mentally incompetent?" Michael finally spoke up. "Dad, I had no idea about any of this. Why didn't you ever tell me about Blackwood development?" "Michael, you're 31 years old. When's the last time you asked me about my work?" He thought about it and couldn't come up with an answer. "You knew I worked in construction and development. You never asked what kind of development or how successful the business was." "But Dad, you live so simply. The Honda, the Costco shopping, the old clothes." "Michael, I live simply because I built wealth by spending less than I earned and investing the difference. Your mother and I drove used cars so we could buy commercial properties. We shopped at discount stores so we could accumulate capital. We lived modestly so we could build something substantial." Jessica was still scrolling through social media reactions. The Christmas dinner revelation was spreading across multiple platforms. Someone had found the Forbes article and shared it with commentary about stealth wealth and assumptions about success. Her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. "Hello?" Her face went white. "Yes, this is Jessica Blackwood. What do you mean my brand partnerships are under review?" She hung up and looked at Michael with panic. "That was luxury lifestyle brands. They're reconsidering my spokesperson contract because the internet is saying my authentic old money content was fake." The foundation of her influencer career was collapsing. Without access to genuine wealth to showcase, her social media brand had no substance. "Jessica," I said calmly, "your followers are learning the same thing you just learned, the difference between assumptions and reality." She turned on me with fury that surprised even Michael. "You could have told me. You could have corrected my assumptions instead of letting me make a fool of myself." "When, Jessica? During the 3 years you spent filming content in my house without asking permission? Or maybe during the weeks you spent planning to have me declared mentally incompetent?" Michael finally spoke up. "Dad, I had no idea about any of this. Why didn't you ever tell me about Blackwood development?" "Michael, you're 31 years old. When's the last time you asked me about my work?" He thought about it and couldn't come up with an answer. "You knew I worked in construction and development. You never asked what kind of development or how successful the business was." "But Dad, you live so simply. The Honda, the Costco shopping, the old clothes." "Michael, I live simply because I built wealth by spending less than I earned and investing the difference. Your mother and I drove used cars so we could buy commercial properties. We shopped at discount stores so we could accumulate capital. We lived modestly so we could build something substantial." Jessica was still scrolling through social media reactions. The Christmas dinner revelation was spreading across multiple platforms. Someone had found the Forbes article and shared it with commentary about stealth wealth and assumptions about success. Her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. Hello? Her face went white. Yes, this is Jessica Blackwood. What do you mean my brand partnerships are under review? She hung up and looked at Michael with panic. That was luxury lifestyle brands. They're reconsidering my spokesperson contract because the internet is saying my authentic old money content was fake. The foundation of her influencer career was collapsing. Without access to genuine wealth to showcase, her social media brand had no substance. Jessica, I said calmly, your followers are learning the same thing you just learned, the difference between assumptions and reality. She turned on me with fury that surprised even Michael. You could have told me, you could have corrected my assumptions instead of letting me make a fool of myself. When, Jessica, during the 3 years you spent filming content in my house without asking permission, or maybe during the weeks you spent planning to have me declared mentally incompetent? Michael finally spoke up. Dad, I had no idea about any of this. Why didn't you ever tell me about Blackwood development? Michael, you're 31 years old. When's the last time you asked me about my work? He thought about it and couldn't come up with an answer. You knew I worked in construction and development. You never asked what kind of development or how successful the business was. But Dad, you live so simply. The Honda, the Costco shopping, the old clothes? Michael, I live simply because I built wealth by spending less than I earned and investing the difference. Your mother and I drove used cars so we could buy commercial properties. We shopped at discount stores so we could accumulate capital. We lived modestly so we could build something substantial. Jessica was still scrolling through social media reactions. The Christmas dinner revelation was spreading across multiple platforms. Someone had found the Forbes article and shared it with commentary about stealth wealth and assumptions about success. Her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. Hello? Her face went white. Yes, this is Jessica Blackwood. What do you mean my brand partnerships are under review? She hung up and looked at Michael with panic. That was luxury lifestyle brands. They're reconsidering my spokesperson contract because the internet is saying my authentic old money content was fake. The foundation of her influencer career was collapsing. Without access to genuine wealth to showcase, her social media brand had no substance. Jessica, I said calmly, your followers are learning the same thing you just learned, the difference between assumptions and reality. She turned on me with fury that surprised even Michael. You could have told me. You could have corrected my assumptions instead of letting me make a fool of myself. When, Jessica, during the 3 years you spent filming content in my house without asking permission, or maybe during the weeks you spent planning to have me declared mentally incompetent? Michael finally spoke up. Dad, I had no idea about any of this. Why didn't you ever tell me about Blackwood development? Michael, you're 31 years old. When's the last time you asked me about my work? He thought about it and had no answer. You knew I worked in construction and development. You never asked what kind of development or how successful the business was. But Dad, you live so simply. The Honda, the Costco shopping, the old clothes. Michael, I live simply because I built wealth by spending less than I earned and investing the difference. Your mother and I drove used cars so we could buy commercial properties.
3 months later, Jessica showed up at my new office in Manhattan. Blackwood Development had finally come out of the shadows, and our Midtown headquarters reflected 4 decades of success. Floor-to-ceiling windows, conference rooms named after our most successful projects, and a reception area displaying every Forbes article and industry award we'd earned over the years. Jessica looked different. Gone were the designer clothes and professional styling. She wore simple jeans, a plain sweater, and the kind of tired expression that comes from learning hard lessons about reality. Richard, I know I have no right to ask, but could we talk? My assistant had buzzed to let me know she was here. I'd been expecting this conversation for weeks. Of course, Jessica. Come in. She walked into my office slowly, taking in the wall of photographs showing ribbon-cutting ceremonies, groundbreaking events, and construction milestones spanning 40 years. "I never knew any of this existed," she said quietly. "You never asked." She nodded, accepting the truth of that statement. "Richard, I need to apologize. Not the kind of apology I posted on social media to try to save my career, but a real one. I was wrong about everything. About you, about what I deserved, about how wealth works, about what family means." She sat down across from my desk, the same desk where I'd planned her Christmas dinner education. "Jessica, what have you learned these 3 months?" She laughed bitterly. "I've learned that losing 150,000 followers happens a lot faster than gaining them. I've learned that brand partnerships disappear overnight when your authenticity gets questioned. I've learned that the lifestyle I thought I deserved was never actually mine." She pulled out a folder of her own. "These are all the brand partnerships I lost after Christmas. $340,000 in annual income, gone. The luxury fashion deals, the sponsored content agreements, the affiliate marketing contracts, all canceled because my audience realized I was performing wealth I hadn't earned." She set the folder on my desk. "I also learned that the house I called my dream home is being demolished next month to build that boutique hotel." "How does that make you feel?" "Honestly, it makes me realize I never actually cared about the house itself. I cared about what owning it would say about me. I cared about the content I could create there, the lifestyle it would let me project, the social status it would give me." She was quiet for a moment. "I cared about everything except what the house meant to you." I leaned back in my chair. "What did the house mean to me, Jessica?" "It was where you went to remember your wife, where you chose to live after she died because she always wanted to be near the ocean. It was your home, not your investment property or your social media backdrop. It was where you grieved and healed and built a life after losing the person you loved most." She was right. "Jessica, why are you here?" "Because I want to understand what I did wrong so I can make sure I never do it again. Because I want to apologize to someone who deserves an apology. And because I want to ask you something that might sound crazy." "What's that?" "I want to ask if you'd consider teaching me how wealth actually works." The request surprised me. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I spent 3 years creating content about generational wealth and property management without understanding anything about either topic. I built a career on fictional expertise. I want to learn real expertise." She pulled out another document. "I've been working at a marketing agency for the past 2 months. Entry-level position, $45,000 salary. It's the first job I've ever had that wasn't dependent on social media followers or brand partnerships." "How's that going?" "It's humbling. I'm 31 years old and I'm learning basic professional skills that most people master in their 20s. But I'm also learning something I never understood before." "Which is?" "The difference between earning something and expecting something. Between building value and performing value." Jessica stood up and walked to the window overlooking Manhattan. "Richard, I've been thinking about something you said at Christmas dinner, about the difference between assumptions and reality. I realized that my entire adult life has been built on assumptions. I assumed Michael's family had old money. I assumed you were struggling financially. I assumed I deserved things I'd never worked for. And now? Now I'm trying to build a life based on reality instead of assumptions. It's harder, but it feels more honest." She turned back to face me. "Richard, I'm also trying to figure out how to repair my relationship with Michael." That was the conversation I'd been waiting for. "How is Michael handling all this?" "He's angry, At me for the assumptions I made, at himself for believing them, at both of us for never asking you about your actual life. He feels like he wasted years being embarrassed by his father when he should have been proud of him. He's also struggling with the fact that he built his identity around being the successful son who had to take care of his struggling father when the reality was the opposite. Have you two talked about your future together? Jessica's expression got complicated. We're in counseling, trying to figure out if our marriage was based on genuine love or if I married him because I thought he represented financial security, and he married me because I made him feel successful and sophisticated. What do you think you'll discover? I think we'll discover that relationships built on false assumptions are hard to repair, but I also think we both want to try building something real instead of something performed. She paused. Richard, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you think I'm a bad person? The question hung in the air between us. Jessica, I think you're a person who made bad choices based on false assumptions about how the world works. I think you confused performing wealth with building wealth, confused wanting something with deserving something, and confused assumptions with reality. But I don't think that makes you inherently bad. Do you think people can change? I think people can learn. Whether they actually change depends on whether they're willing to do the hard work of examining their assumptions and building something real instead of something performed. I leaned forward. Jessica, why do you really want me to teach you about wealth? Because I want to understand the difference between what I was doing and what you did. I was performing wealth for social media followers. You were building wealth through decades of smart decisions and hard work. I want to learn how to build instead of perform. And if I said no, then I'd find another way to learn. But I'd prefer to learn from someone who's actually built something substantial instead of someone who just talks about it online. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a business card. This is Catherine Mills, my attorney. She handles continuing education programs for young entrepreneurs. If you're serious about learning, she can recommend some courses. Jessica took the card like it was made of gold. You'd help me after everything I did? Jessica, you threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could steal my house. You built a social media career using my property without permission. You convinced my son that his father was a burden who needed to be managed. She winced at each item on the list. But you also learned something from the consequences of those choices. The question is whether you'll use what you learned to build something better. She stood to leave, then turned back. Richard, one more question. If you could do Christmas dinner over again, would you handle it differently? I thought about it. I would have corrected your assumptions about my finances much earlier. Letting you build a social media career on false premises wasn't fair to you or to your followers, but I don't regret showing you the truth about wealth versus the performance of wealth. Even though it destroyed my career, Jessica, your career was built on a foundation that wasn't real. It was going to collapse eventually when people realized you were performing expertise you didn't possess. I just accelerated the timeline. She nodded. That's probably the most honest thing anyone's ever said to me. After Jessica left, I sat in my office thinking about assumptions and reality, about the difference between building something and performing something. My daughter-in-law had spent 3 years assuming I was a struggling retiree who needed her help managing my finances. The reality was that I'd built a commercial real estate empire that employed dozens of people and generated millions in annual revenue. But I'd also assumed that living modestly while building wealth was obviously virtuous, and that my family would understand and respect my choices without explanation. The reality was that my secretiveness had created. 2 years later, I stood in the conference room of Blackwood Development Corporation, watching Jessica give a presentation to 12 young entrepreneurs about the difference between building wealth and performing wealth. She was a different person than the woman who had screamed at me on Christmas morning about ruining her life. Gone was the entitled daughter-in-law who had threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent. In her place stood someone who had learned the hard way that assumptions about other people's finances can cost you everything you think you deserve. The biggest mistake I made, Jessica told the room, was confusing access to wealth with ownership of wealth. I had access to my father-in-law's property for content creation, but I convinced myself that access meant entitlement. I built a social media brand around lifestyle content filmed in his house while planning to force him out of that same house because I assumed he couldn't afford to keep it. The entrepreneurs were listening intently. Most of them were in their 20s and 30s, building businesses while navigating family dynamics and social media pressures. Jessica's story had become legendary in business circles, a cautionary tale about assumptions and entitlement that business schools used as a case study. What I learned, she continued, is that real wealth isn't about appearing successful online. It's about building systems and assets that generate value over time. She clicked to the next slide, which showed a graph of her social media follower count over 3 years. The dramatic spike when she started the old money aesthetic content, the steady growth through 200,000 followers, and then the catastrophic drop after Christmas dinner when the truth came out. I lost 150,000 followers in 2 weeks when people realized my lifestyle content was built on someone else's success. But losing those followers taught me something more valuable than any brand partnership ever could. "What did you learn?" asked Sarah, a 26-year-old who was building a sustainable fashion company while fighting the temptation to inflate her success on social media. Jessica smiled. "I learned that building an audience based on performed authenticity is like building a house on quicksand. The moment people realize you're not who you claim to be, everything collapses." After the presentation, Jessica and I walked through Manhattan toward the construction site where Blackwood Development was breaking ground on our latest project, a mixed-use development in Brooklyn that would provide affordable housing alongside commercial space for local entrepreneurs. "Richard, can I ask you something I've been thinking about?" "Of course." "Do you think I would have learned these lessons if you had just corrected my assumptions about your finances early on?" It was a question I'd been asking myself for 2 years. "Jessica, I think you needed to experience the consequences of your assumptions to understand why they were dangerous. If I had simply told you I was wealthy, you might have changed your behavior without changing your thinking." We stopped at a crosswalk, and Jessica pulled out her phone, not to check social media notifications or take a selfie, but to show me photos from her latest project. "These are the financial literacy workshops I've been running for young women, teaching them how to build actual wealth instead of performing wealth online." The photos showed Jessica in community centers and colleges, presenting to groups of women about budgeting, investing, and business fundamentals. "How many workshops have you done?" 47 so far this year. And I'm writing a book about my experience. Working title, "The Assumption Trap: What I Learned from Trying to Steal My Father-in-Law's House." She laughed at the absurdity of her former behavior. "My literary agent says publishers are interested because the story combines family drama, social media cautionary tale, and financial education." We reached the construction site, and I handed Jessica a hard hat. As someone who now worked part-time for Blackwood Development as our community outreach coordinator, she'd learned to appreciate construction sites as places where assumptions become reality through planning, work, and time. "Jessica, look at this site 2 years from now. What do you see?" She studied the architectural renderings posted on the construction fence. "I see 200 units of affordable housing, 15,000 square feet of commercial space for local entrepreneurs, and approximately 300 construction jobs over 18 months. I see a project that will generate rental income for decades while providing housing stability for families who need it. And how do you know that's what will happen? Because I've learned to read financial projections, construction timelines, and market analysis reports instead of assuming things will work out based on wishful thinking. She pointed to specific details in the rendering. The ground floor commercial spaces are designed for local businesses, not chain stores. The apartment layouts prioritize functionality over luxury amenities. The parking garage includes electric vehicle charging stations for future sustainability. Very good. 2 years ago, what would you have seen when looking at this site? Jessica thought carefully. 2 years ago, I would have seen content opportunities. I would have thought about how to photograph myself in front of the construction for social media. I would have focused on how the project made me look instead of what the project actually accomplished. A group of construction workers walked past us heading home after their shift. Jessica had learned all their names and asked about their families during site visits. "Richard, can I tell you something?" "What's that?" "Michael and I are expecting a baby, due in September." The news didn't surprise me. I'd noticed Jessica glowing during recent family dinners and Michael's protective hovering. "Congratulations! How are you feeling about becoming parents?" "Terrified and excited, but also grateful that our child will grow up in a family where people ask questions instead of making assumptions, where wealth is understood as something you build through work instead of something you're entitled to inherit." "What kind of parent do you want to be?" "The kind that teaches our child to ask questions about how things work instead of assuming they understand based on appearances. The kind that shows them the difference between earning respect and demanding respect." Jessica removed her hard hat as we prepared to leave the site. "Richard, there's something I need to tell you." "What's that?" "You know that—" She started to speak, but I stopped her. "I know. I'm looking forward to meeting my grandchild."
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.